Back in 1987, a sociologist named William Julius Wilson published this book that asked a really tough, really troubling question. See, right as the civil rights movement was having these huge victories, tearing down legal walls, life for the poorest Black Americans in the inner cities wasn't getting better. It was getting so much worse. So let's dive in and really try to unpack this paradox at the heart of the truly disadvantaged.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the central mystery Wilson was trying to solve, this tale of two different kinds of ghettos. Then, we'll jump into the big debate that was raging at the time. After that, we'll get into Wilson's game-changing idea about structural shifts and how he defined this new group he called the underclass. Then we'll ground it all in the real world with some hard data from Chicago. And finally, we'll explore his really bold idea for how to fix things.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The core of what Wilson was writing about isn't just poverty. It's about a very specific and, frankly, a very alarming transformation that was happening deep inside America's cities.
And here it is. This is the central puzzle. You've got these landmark civil rights laws opening up all these new doors. So why on earth were things like crime, unemployment, and family breakdown just exploding in the very places that were supposed to be helped? It just didn't make any sense.
This slide really just lays out the stark difference that's at the heart of this whole thing. You know, back in the 40s and 50s, these inner-city neighborhoods, yeah, they were poor, but they had a social fabric. They were mixed class. You had working families, some professionals, and poor folks all living in the same area. People felt safe. I mean, they'd sleep on their fire escapes on hot nights. Now, fast forward to the 1980s, and that whole social world had just crumbled. It was replaced by this intense, concentrated poverty and a fear that was everywhere.
So, with this crisis unfolding, how were people explaining it? Well, the whole conversation was really dominated by two completely opposite sides, and Wilson came along and basically said, you're both missing the bigger picture.
On one side, you had the liberals. For them, the main culprit was pretty straightforward: ongoing racism. And they were often really hesitant to even talk about things like rising crime because they were afraid it would just end up blaming the victim and feeding into racist stereotypes. Then on the other side, you had conservatives. They argued the problem was a culture of poverty, a set of bad habits and values passed down through generations, made even worse by welfare policies that, they said, discouraged people from working or getting married.
But Wilson thought the liberal argument just didn't hold water. I mean, if racism was the only reason, why did things get so much worse after all the big civil rights wins? The timing was completely off. He said just blaming racism was too simple. It couldn't explain the huge economic earthquake that was happening. And by shying away from the tough subjects, liberals basically left the door wide open for conservatives to control the whole conversation.
But he wasn't letting the conservatives off the hook either. He said, you guys are focusing only on culture and individual choices, and you're completely ignoring the elephant in the room. The entire structure of opportunity had collapsed. Wilson's point was that, behavior doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It's shaped by the actual choices people have, and more importantly, the choices they don't have.
So this brings us to Wilson's big idea, his powerful alternative. He argued that this crisis wasn't really driven by culture or racism alone. It was driven by massive, impersonal, economic and social forces that were turning American cities upside down.
Let's trace this chain of events, because it's really the core of his argument. Step 1, deindustrialization. All those good manufacturing jobs, the kind of jobs that let you join a union and build a middle-class life without a college degree, poof, they just vanished. Step 2, a bittersweet victory. The civil rights movement succeeds, and for the first time, working and middle-class Black families can move out of the ghetto. This leads directly to Step 3, concentrated poverty. With the jobs gone and the more stable families gone, the only people left are the ones with the fewest resources, the truly disadvantaged. And that brings us to the final step, profound social isolation. The people left behind are now totally cut off from job networks, from mainstream society, from everything.
And that's the key, the disappearance of what Wilson called social buffers. These were the families who went to work every day, who owned homes, who were role models. Their very presence acted like a social anchor for the whole neighborhood. They upheld the norms. When they left, that anchor was gone, and the basic institutions, the churches, the local businesses, the community groups, they all started to fall apart.
Now, to describe this totally new reality of intense disadvantage and isolation, Wilson used a term that he knew was going to be controversial.
He knew the word underclass was loaded with baggage, but he felt he had to use it. In his own words, he's saying that the old label, lower class, just didn't begin to describe the depth of what was happening. It couldn't capture this new, unprecedented reality.
So who exactly is he talking about? Well, it's not one single group. It's a mix of people who were left behind, totally cut off from the legal economy. It's the long-term unemployed, people caught up in street crime, and families that have been dependent on welfare for generations. And what they all share is this deep, profound separation from mainstream American life.
And this is crucial. Wilson wasn't just spinning theories. He wasn't just sitting in an ivory tower. He backed up every single part of his argument with a mountain of cold, hard data, using his own city of Chicago as a giant case study.
First, let's just zoom out and look at the national picture he was seeing. This data from 1984 is, well, it's shocking. It shows this huge disparity in violent crime arrests, which was a major symptom of the social breakdown he was talking about. This really sets the stage for the scale of the crisis.
Okay, now let's zoom in on Chicago, specifically the Robert Taylor Homes, a massive public housing project. Get this, the unemployment rate there was estimated to be 47%. Almost 1 in every 2 people didn't have a job.
What about families? An unbelievable 93% of families with kids were run by a single parent. And their income? The median family income was just over $5,000 for a whole year. When you put those numbers together, it's not just a picture of poverty. It's a picture of near total economic collapse in one community.
And while Chicago was in crisis, it was far from alone. Just look at this data. This wave of violence and social decay was a national urban problem, hitting old industrial cities like Detroit and even the nation's capital, D.C., even harder.
All right, so if the problem is this massive and this structural, what in the world is the solution? This is where Wilson makes his most provocative point. He proposed something he actually called a hidden agenda.
Wilson basically said that policies like affirmative action, policies aimed at a specific race, weren't really helping the truly disadvantaged. They were mostly helping minorities who were already more middle class and educated. So he argued for a complete pivot. Instead of programs targeted by race, we need big, universal programs. Things like job training, public works projects, better schools, programs that are open to everyone.
And here's the logic, which is pretty clever. It's way easier to build political support for universal programs that help everyone, right? But, and here's the hidden part, because the truly disadvantaged are in the worst shape, these universal programs would automatically help them the most. It's a way of tackling the root problem, joblessness, without getting stuck in the huge political fights that race-specific policies always seem to create.
And all of this leaves us with a question that is just as urgent today as it was in 1987. Wilson's diagnosis was that these are structural problems, not problems with individuals. So if he's right, the solutions have to be structural too. The challenge he really leaves for all of us is to think what kinds of big, bold, universal ideas could actually tackle economic inequality today and, crucially, build the broad support we'd need to make them a reality.